right. By way of announcements this week, don't forget Wednesday night Bible study as we continue our series Faith in 3D. And so you be here Wednesday evening for that. Last week we looked at the depth of our faith. And so you'll be here Wednesday evening, 7 o'clock for that. Next Sunday morning is Fellowship Sunday. We'll have donuts during our Sunday school hour and fellowship, so remember that. October the 5th is Lord's Supper in the morning service, and so keep that in mind. October the 8th, business meeting following Bible study, and then the 19th through the 22nd, Brother Aaron Abner will be here, and we'll be in revival. Sunday night, Derek will be back. Him and Mr. Willoughby will be here. I know it's weird. His name is Eugene Willoughby. Okay, everybody I know calls him Mr. Willoughby, so he's Mr. Willoughby. But anyway, they'll be here that evening. Special music, and so remember that. Monday evening, the mission will be here, and they know that, right? It became a recurring theme last year, and so anyway, they'll be here and spoke to David and Rhonda today, and they're going to double check with everybody, but it sounds like Woodland should be here that Tuesday evening. And then LaGrange they're not going to have service that Wednesday evening. They're going to be in here with us, and so their choir will be singing that Wednesday evening as well. And so keep those things in mind. Looking forward to a good week, and be in prayer for that. Be in prayer for Aaron as he prepares. All right. Anything else? That's all I know of right off. Prayer list this evening. Continue to remember George and Rose. Continue to remember Jerry and Molly. Aaron's got a couple of tests coming up, a couple of appointments coming up first of the month. So remember him. Paul's got a place being removed off of his face here in about 2 weeks. Remember him. How's Dale doing? I didn't know he was in the hospital. Okay. Yeah, I didn't either. Okay. Did not know that. Okay. Remember Dale. Remember. Just can't hang with the big dogs, can he? Remember Jeff. Any others? Yeah. Brooke and Zach got a phone call yesterday from her dad, and he and his wife were expecting, which is great. He's my age, so maybe more pray for Mike. Yeah. So, pray for the church. Pray for one another. Continue to be in prayer for our nation. All right. Let's bow in a word of prayer. Jim, lead us, please. Amen. We had a good service at Woodland this morning. I appreciate y'all letting me go, and good to see the folks out there. And they even had a little bit of preaching, and so I hope y'all had a good rest of the service this morning after I left. And Leanne said it was a good service, and so thankful for that. Appreciate Derek being here, filling in for me, and so he'll be back, I think. She is an occupational therapist at, I think, some of the nursing homes up that way, I think. I'm not 100% sure on that one. But yeah, she's an OT. Is she with the schools too? Okay. Yeah, I couldn't remember, but yeah. Yeah, she's an OT. All right, got your Bible, Mark chapter 6. We're going to finish this chapter finally. We have been now, let's see here, I'll just tell you real quick. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 weeks. This will be 5 weeks just in chapter 6. And a lot of stuff to cover, and a lot of meat in this chapter, really, if you think about it. We've looked at Jesus there with his family. We looked at him sending the apostles out. We looked at the beheading of John the Baptist. We looked at him sending the apostles out. We looked at the apostles coming back. We talked about that last week. And then this evening, we're going to be looking at Jesus, a very familiar passage to us, walking on the water. And, have we ever been caught in a storm? We've all been caught in storms that we can't control, haven't we? And I'm talking about, obviously, literal storms. We had a real nice one a few months ago, and a lot of people still dealing with the damage from the hailstorm in April. I remember, we're going back now, I don't know how many years, 2012 maybe, the derecho. That's what I hear. They can keep that prediction. But I remember we were driving, we had gone up to Mom and Dad's, we'd gotten them, and we headed to the Amish country that day, and just a gorgeous day all day long. And on the way back, we'd going through Parkersburg on 77, and that derecho came through, and Leanne's driving. And just, you remember that? Stuff just flying all over the road and all of that. I remember, she and I had this conversation as we're leaving Mom and Dad's. Are we going to be able to get home? How much damage is there? We had no clue. You get to Pedro and the roof of the trailer is hanging on the power lines out there across from your mom and dad. And, trampolines hanging everywhere. I was half expecting to be in Mary's front yard again. There was a couple places where there were trees over the road and we had to go around and all of that. And, you're driving through the pounding rain. We've all been there, hands clenching to the wheel, white knuckling it. And we've all been there, okay? Maybe it wasn't a literal storm that we went through. Maybe it was, a storm of life, that phone call from the doctor, some kind of a responsibility that lands on us that's too much for us to carry. And, it's kind of like we've been put in a boat that we didn't want to be in, right? We're in a boat we didn't want to be in. You didn't choose the storm, but somehow we still find ourselves in the middle of it, trying to row through it with everything that we've got. And it feels like the harder you row, the stronger the wind blows against us. And I think that's exactly where we find the disciples at here at the end of Mark chapter 6. They've just witnessed Jesus feeding the 5,000, and they went out with 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and they come back with 12 baskets of leftovers. Okay, and so the very next scene, though, their faith is way up here, right? They'd seen Jesus do this miraculous thing, and they are on, we would say they're on the mountaintop, right? They're on cloud 9 right now. And yet the very next scene that we see is Jesus sends them away. Jesus knew the storm was there. He knew the storm was coming. And Jesus sends them into the midst of the storm where their strength is no match for the wind. And here's what we see. Understand this as we look at this passage here in just a few minutes. These guys were right where Jesus wanted them to be. They were right where he sent them, right? They were doing exactly what Jesus told them to do. They were going exactly to where Jesus had sent them. They're not in trouble because of disobedience. In fact, it's quite the opposite. They're in trouble because of obedience. All right? They're in this situation because they were obedient. Now, to us this evening, that doesn't sound fair. That doesn't feel fair, does it? A lot of us assume that if we're following Jesus, it's supposed to be clear skies and, favorable winds, and everything's supposed to be perfect. It's supposed to be smooth sailing, but let's be honest. Sometimes following Christ means rowing into a headwind. And the good news is this. Even when we can't see him, he sees us. Even when we feel abandoned, he's closer than we think. And when the storm rages, he steps into our boats with the words that we most need to hear. Take courage. It is I. Do not be afraid. Let's pick up here in verse 45, and we'll read through verse 52. It says, And straightway he constrained the disciples to get into the ship and to go to the other side before unto Bethesda, while he sent away the people. And when he had sent them away, he departed into a mountaintop to pray. And when even was come, the ship was in the midst of the sea, and he alone on the land. And he saw them toiling in the rowing, for the wind was contrary unto them. And about the fourth watch of the night he came unto them, walking upon the sea, and would have passed by them. But when they saw him walking upon the sea, they supposed it had been a spirit, and cried out. For they all saw him, and were troubled. And immediately he talked with them, and said unto them, Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid. And he went up into the ship, and the wind ceased, and they were sore amazed in themselves beyond measure, and wondered, for they considered not the miracle of the loaves, for their heart was hardened. Now, understand this. We see here that Jesus constrained them. He sent them into the storm. It says there at the beginning of verse 45, and straightway, we would say today, immediately Jesus made the disciples get in the boat and take off. Immediately, he put them in the boat and said, go on over to the other side. We're going to dismiss the crowd, and I'll meet up with you. And so that word that constrained, that made, is what that translates to, and it's important. In the Greek, it's strong because it's Jesus compelling them to go. The disciples didn't decide just, hey, Lord, we're going to go ahead and take off. We'll meet you on the other side. You catch up. No, they didn't just decide to take this boat ride. Jesus insisted that they go. That means that the storm that they rode into was no accident. They weren't out of God's will. In fact, they were right in the middle of it. They were right where God told them to be, right where Jesus told them to be. And we often think storms are punishment, or maybe signs that something's wrong with our walk with God. This passage reminds us this evening, sometimes storms come precisely because we're obeying Jesus. We're right where he wants us to be. And so, I think we need to understand some things. Why would Jesus send them into a storm? Why would he do that? Well, I think, first of all, he's protecting them from their pride. Now, let's go back a little bit. Two things, I think, he was protecting them from when it comes to being protected from their pride. Think about what he had sent them out. And they came back talking about the things that they had done, the things that they had seen, the gospel, and the things that they had said, and all of those things. And then Jesus says to them, hey, let's get apart from the people. Let's get, we talked about this last week. Let's take off into the mountains. We're going to kind of have a retreat, refresh, refuel, and all of that, and be ready to go again. And they get there, and there's 5,000 men looking for lunch, okay? Not to mention all the children. And so now they had just seen the feeding of the 5,000. A miracle so overwhelming that the crowd we see in John chapter 6 in this passage, they wanted to take Jesus and make him king. And so imagine how the disciples must have felt. They just come off of this spiritual high, so to speak, of being sent out and sharing the gospel and talking about Christ and healing people and casting out demons and doing all of these things. And they come back now and they got a front row seat to Jesus feeding the 5,000 with a little boy's lunch. They've seen God's power. They're part of the miracle. And it would have been real easy for them to get a little puffed up, wouldn't it? Especially those guys that were responsible for bringing that little lunch to Jesus in the first place. Hey, look what we did. Look what we've done. And to start thinking that they maybe understood it all, if you will. And so Jesus sends them away before their hearts can get carried away by the pride. And then the second thing that I think, the reason that Jesus sent them into the middle of the storm is this: to prepare them for deeper faith. Jesus had shown them he could provide bread. He was going to show them that he also is the bread of life. He had shown them that he could multiply fish. Now he's going to reveal he is the Lord over the winds and the waves. And so storms stretch us. They move us from head knowledge to a trust in our heart. And I think that's what he's doing with the disciples. I think that's what he's doing here. And then to teach them some dependence. Now, keep in mind, most of the disciples were skilled fishermen, weren't they? Peter, John, Andrew, James, Simon, and all of these guys. Okay, they were skilled fishermen. Now, for them to be having trouble in the midst of a storm, they'd been in storms all the time, hadn't they? I mean, it was part of their livelihood for years. They were used to it. This storm, though, was bigger than them. And sometimes Jesus sends us into situations where our own strength is not enough. And it's in those times we've got to learn to rely on his strength. And I think that's what he was doing. Think about, when a coach pushes an athlete into harder drills, it's not cruel, it's training. The coach knows that the muscle only grows when it's tested under resistance. Our faith only grows when it's tested under resistance. And so our faith muscles can grow stronger in those times. Now, understand this. Don't just assume that because we're facing headwinds that we're outside of God's will. The disciples were exactly where Jesus told them to be. He sent them that way. He pushed them that way. And so Jesus doesn't send us into storms to sink us. He sends us there to show us more of himself. And sometimes the greatest storms are the greatest classrooms in our life, okay? Obedience doesn't guarantee calm waters, but it does guarantee the presence of Christ in our life. Sometimes obedience still leads us into the storms. The second thing that I want us to see is verse 47 and 48, and I'm paraphrasing this. Later that night, they're in the middle of the lake, and they're alone, and Jesus is still on the land, and he looks out, and he saw the disciples. They're straining at the oars because the wind was against them. Jesus sees us when we struggle. That's the second thing that I want us to take away this evening from this passage. He sees us in the struggles, okay? The disciples, they're in the dark, they're in the middle of the lake, and they're struggling against the wind. To them, Jesus is very far away. But Mark says what? He saw them. Jesus saw them. That's the comfort that we have. We may not see Jesus in our storm, but he always sees us in ours. He always sees us. And so what this shows us about Jesus is his vision is not limited by the distance or the darkness. It's not limited, his care, by our time or place. Even when it feels like he's absent, we know that his eyes are on his children. He's always watching us. And so, it's kind of like this. Dad always laughed. You could put a baby in a nursery and mama sitting in here in church, and that baby start to cry. And there could be 15 babies back there, but that mama's going to know her baby's cry, isn't it? That mama's going to know. A mother can hear a baby cry from across the house, even while asleep. She knows that voice and she responds. And in the same way, Jesus knows the sound of his disciples' struggles. He sees them even when they can't see him. And so, there's times in our battles that we feel maybe unseen. But understand this, God sees it. We may think our prayers go unheard, but guess what? God hears them. Never mistake silence for absence. Jesus sees us straining at the oars. Just as he saw those disciples straining. They didn't see him. He saw them. And we may not feel God's presence in a storm, but he sees us. He's not unaware. He's not distant. He's not uninterested. He sees us, and he cares. And here's the third thing that we can take away. Jesus comes in an unexpected way. It says here in verse 48, shortly before dawn, he went out to them, walking on the water. Walking on the water. He was about to pass. In fact, he was walking. He was going to walk on by on the other side, wasn't he? It says he was about to pass them by when they saw him walking on the lake, and they thought he was a spirit. They thought he was a ghost. Okay? And Jesus comes to them in the storm, but he comes in such an unexpected way that they couldn't miss it being him. They couldn't miss that it was Jesus. Instead of rejoicing, though, they're terrified. And so Jesus comes in an unexpected way. So there's some truths here for us. And first thing is this: sometimes God's help looks different than we imagined. It may not be the answer to prayer that we think it should be. We expect rescue in the form of escape. Sometimes he comes to us in the middle of the storm. We expect calm seas, but sometimes he calls us to courage first. And then he speaks the word that every soul needs to hear. Take courage. It's me. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. In fact, we see this phrase, don't be afraid, or fear not, or some variation of it, 366 times in the Bible, one for every day, including a leap year. We're minded not to be afraid. In the Greek, that means it is I am. Now, there's a whole lot of talk we could do about that. Okay, that statement right there. The same name that God gave to Moses at the burning bush. This isn't just a reassurance, it's a revelation. Jesus is declaring, I am God, I am present with you, I am sovereign over the storm. A child walks into a dark room and they may not recognize their parent because the room's dark. They can't see them, right? But just as that parent knows the child's voice, the child knows the parent's voice. you know. And the voice makes all the difference in the world. In the same way the disciples were terrified until Jesus spoke. And in that he revealed who he truly was. And so don't miss God's presence just because it comes in an unfamiliar package. Just because it may come to us walking on the water looking like a ghost, okay? And so listen for that voice in the storm. Because in the storm he reveals himself most clearly when fear is the loudest. And remember the words, I am. They're bigger than our I'm afraid. Then number 4, he climbs into the boat, the wind dies down, the storm stops, they're completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves, and their hearts were hardened. Jesus gets into our boat. When the storm comes in our life, Jesus comes to us. He sees us first of all. He comes to us in an unexpected way, and then he gets in our boat. He gets in the boat. Understand that this evening. Jesus doesn't stay at a distance. He steps into the boat, and immediately the storm is gone. What this shows us is the presence of Jesus changes everything. His presence changes everything. Peace is not found in the absence of storms. It's found in the presence of Christ. And the disciples were amazed. Mark points out that they still didn't understand fully. I think that's important for us to see that. Their hearts were still hard. The storm wasn't just about saving their lives. It was truly about opening their eyes to who Jesus really is. Think about how a tense room changes when the right person walks in, maybe a mediator or a parent or a leader of some kind, and their presence brings order. That's what happens here. When Jesus entered the boat, the chaos, because let's be honest, that's what it was, turns to calm. Don't just admire Jesus from a distance. We got to invite him into the boat. Real peace doesn't come from a calmer circumstance, but from a closer Christ. And understand, Christ doesn't move. If we're farther away from God than we used to be, it's because we moved, not him. Storms aren't wasted if they lead us to a clearer vision of who Jesus is. And so as we kind of wrap this up, okay, keep in mind, Jesus sends us into storms for our growth. He sees us in our struggle. He comes to us in an unexpected the I am, and he brings peace when he climbs in to our boat. Jesus comes walking on the water. The disciples don't realize it. They don't recognize him. They think he's a ghost. And sometimes God's help looks different from what we expect. So much different that we almost miss it. We expect rescue and comfort. He often comes in challenge. We expect immediate calm, but he first calls us to courage, and then he speaks those words. Take courage. It is I. Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. The disciples set out on that lake in obedience to Jesus. They were doing what God had told them to do. But the storm still came. And maybe that's us today. Maybe that's our story today. We're doing our best to follow him, raising our family, showing up at work, staying faithful in our walk with God, and yet the wind is still against us. The storm still rages. The waves are pounding. We feel like we're straining at the oars. We're exhausted, and we're wondering where Jesus is. We've all been there. We've all been there. It reminds us, this passage does, that Jesus sends us into those storms, not to destroy us, but to grow us. And in those storms, he sees us, even when we feel unseen and unheard. And he comes to us. And when he does, he reveals himself to us. And when he comes, he gets in the boat. And in that, he brings us presence. His presence brings us peace that the storm cannot steal. The miracle of this story, and a lot of times we look at this story and we think, Jesus walked on the water. That's what we talk about. That's the miracle, isn't it? That's what we think of, right? You know? Jesus is walking on the water. That's not the miracle. The miracle is he stepped into the boat. And the miracle of the gospel is that when the God who rules the sea stepped into our world, into our lives, into our storms, he brought peace. He brought comfort in that presence. He brought calm to our chaos. He says to us today, take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid. That's a good place for us to stop. Anybody got anything? All right. Well, let's stand. We'll have a word of prayer, and we'll be dismissed. It's been a good place to be. Yes, it has. Dave, lead us. Amen. Love you. God bless you, and we'll see you Wednesday.